With me is Friedrich Merz, the CDU-CSU candidate for chancellor. Mr. Merz, you had a one-to-one meeting with US Vice President Vance before he declared here on an open stage to the Europeans, but also specifically to the Germans, that there is no room for a firewall against the right. Did that become apparent in your conversation, and what is your reaction?
We talked about completely different topics. Above all, we talked about the issue of Europe's defense capability. We talked about Ukraine, we talked about tariffs, and we only briefly discussed the domestic political situation in Germany. Still, I was not surprised, because he'd already announced in an interview that he would give us, how shall I put it, a public lesson on how to deal with political parties in Germany and how to deal with populism. And I have to say that we have a decidedly different opinion.
How will you react to this now? He also said that the institutions are not as important as majorities. In principle, this is also questioning the Constitution, which also strives to integrate majorities. How will you respond to this?
Today is really a historic day. The American security guarantees are being called into question. The Americans are questioning democratic institutions, and they are interfering quite openly in an election, including in relation to democratic parties and their majorities. And I have to say, it disturbs me. It doesn't surprise me, because they've talked about this before, but I firmly reject it. It's not the job of the American government to explain to us here in Germany how we should protect democratic institutions, and we will continue on our course.
You've already indicated that the US has also announced that it wants to withdraw militarily. Have you been given more details about what this means in concrete terms, and to what extent Germany will be involved? Not just Germany, but Europe.
I made a suggestion to Vice President Vance that if the American government were to talk to the Russian government, the Europeans should be involved in any case, together with Ukraine, and that before such talks took place, that it would be expected that the Russian side would pledge to implement a ceasefire before negotiations would take place. That would be a positive indication from the Russian side that they are seriously interested in peace in Ukraine. But it must be clear to us that we, the Europeans, are on Ukraine's side. And together with America, we also want to open up paths to peace in Europe, because that's what it's all about. It's not just about Ukraine, it's about peace in Europe in the face of Russian aggression, which affects us here in Germany every day by endangering our infrastructure, by endangering our data networks, by endangering data cables in the Baltic Sea. And in this respect, we are interested in a joint European approach, and we should invite the Americans to participate. If they don't want to, then we must be able to do it on our own.
After the talks you had today, how confident are you that Europe and Ukraine will even have a seat at the table in these negotiations for peace in Ukraine?
Ukraine has been granted candidate status as a potential future member state of the European Union. The European Union intends to keep it that way. This is not an issue where the Americans can assert a decision-making right. We will have a NATO summit in May, at which we may also have to discuss changes to Ukraine's membership status. But these are issues that we will not have to discuss until early summer. As of today, the Europeans will have to do a lot more for their own security. That's been clear since Trump's first term. We should have done that. Now the second Trump administration is in office, so time is up. We have to act.
J.D. Vance clearly sees the potential for leadership in the populist right-wing parties in Europe. You yourself have announced that you want to turn Germany from a sleeping middle power into a leading middle power. How specifically do you envision that with this US administration?
I've also had many talks today, and there will be more tomorrow with European heads of states and government. They all expect Germany to take on more leadership responsibility. I have repeatedly called for this. Germany is by far the most populous country in Europe. Germany is located in the geostrategic center of the European continent. We have to fulfill this role. We have to fulfill it together with others. We have to fulfill it together with France, with Poland. Europe expects leadership from Germany, and especially in a situation like this, where America will gradually withdraw, perhaps withdraw completely. We don't know yet. Now is really the time. Europe has to wake up and has to take the responsibility for its own security into its hands.
And finally, the US has now basically set a 5% spending target for defense. To what extent will you commit yourself to the Americans and NATO? And what concrete steps will you take if you become federal chancellor? Because it looks like you will, if the polls are to be believed.
There is a NATO agreement that says at least 2%. We all realize that 2% is not enough. But if there is a new NATO agreement, it has to be a NATO agreement. And that will be discussed at the NATO summit in The Hague in June. This is not a unilateral decision by one NATO member, but a joint decision by all NATO members. That includes Germany, that includes many European countries, that includes Great Britain outside the European Union. So we will have to come to an agreement among the Europeans as to which path we will take together. And then there must be an agreement with the American side. But we will not allow ourselves to be dictated to, and then we simply follow along.
How would you describe the moment you're experiencing here in Munich?
This is historic, and this Security Conference 2025 will still be seen as a profound turning point in a few years' time. But what will become of it then is a matter for the Europeans, and they really, I repeat myself, must wake up now and define their own interests, take them into their hands and really look after them.
Friedrich Merz, Chancellor candidate for the CDU-CSU, thank you.